James Carter was a shadow who had learned to live in the light, or at least he tried. At 45, he carried the weight of a life most would never understand, years spent in deserts and jungles, moving through chaos with the precision of a metronome, his name erased from records that never officially existed. Once a Delta Force commander, he'd walked away from it all 5 years ago, after cancer stole his wife, Renee, and left him with a promise to keep, to raise their daughter, Maya, in a world where peace wasn't just a word. Cincinnati was supposed to be that world, a mid-sized city with enough noise to drown out his past but quiet enough for Maya to grow without fear. He'd traded fatigues for flannel, covert signals for carpools, but some habits never left. The way he scanned a room before entering, the way his hand stayed loose but ready, the way his silence said more than most men's words. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and unremarkable, when the world broke that promise. James drove the family's black SUV, a practical choice with no flair, through the streets of Over the Rhine. Maya, 15, sat in the back, her cheerleader uniform still crisp from practice, her phone glowing in her hands as she texted about the upcoming game. Her thumbs danced across the screen, a cartoon cat charm dangling from the case. Renee's eyes stared back at James from Maya's face, bright, curious, always searching for the next story. She wanted to be a journalist, like her mother had been, exposing truths no one else dared to touch. James had smiled at that dream, though it terrified him. Truth was a dangerous thing in his old life. The cruiser appeared in the rearview mirror without warning, no siren, just a flash of red and blue slicing through the drizzle. James eased the SUV to the curb, his hands steady on the wheel. He hadn't sped, hadn't swerved, but the officer's wave was sharp, 2 fingers cutting the air like a blade. James nodded once, his face blank, and lowered the window. His wife's voice echoed in his mind, "Stay soft for her, James. She needs you whole." He exhaled, keeping his movements slow, deliberate. "License and registration," Officer Daniel Hayes said, his voice clipped, hand hovering near his holster. He was 38, broad-shouldered, with eyes that darted too fast, like a man trying to prove something to himself. Beside him, Officer Michael Reed stood silent, his face unreadable, his hand steady but not touching his weapon. James reached for the glove box, his movements telegraphed, no suddenness to misinterpret. Maya's thumbs paused, her phone still in her lap. She glanced at her father, then at the officers, her breath catching slightly. "Step out of the vehicle," Hayes barked, his eyes locked on Maya, not James. "You, in the back. Out. Now." Maya blinked, her hands trembling as she pushed the door open. Her sneakers hit the wet pavement, the phone still clutched in her hand, the cat charm swinging. James's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Renee's voice again, "Keep her safe, not angry." Maya took one step, then another, her cheerleader skirt catching the light, sequins glinting like tiny stars. "Drop it!" Hayes shouted, his voice cracking like a whip. "Drop it now." She flinched, raising her hands, the phone still in her grip. It caught the sun, a flash of glass and metal. Hayes moved faster than thought, his gun drawn, finger squeezing. The crack of the shot was sharp, final, like a bone snapping. Maya's leg buckled, blood blooming across her white sneaker, soaking the pavement. She collapsed, her phone clattering beside her, screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks. Her mouth opened, but no scream came, only a gasp, confused, as if the world had betrayed her. James was out of the SUV before the echo faded, his movements not rushed but exact, like a machine calibrated for precision. He knelt beside Maya, his hand hovering near her blood-soaked leg but not touching it. His eyes didn't flicker with panic or rage, only a cold, surgical focus. Hayes shouted, "Weapon," but the word fell flat, unanswered. Reed stepped back, his face twitching, not in fear but in disbelief. The air thickened, the silence louder than the gunshot. James looked at Reed, not Hayes, their eyes locking for a moment. Something passed between them, not forgiveness, not judgment, but recognition. Maya's fingers twitched, brushing the broken phone, her breath shallow. James whispered, "Hold on, baby girl," his voice low, steady, a promise carved in steel. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He stood, his shadow falling over Maya, shielding her from the sun's glare, and the street seemed to hold its breath. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear, a sterile haze that clung to the walls of Cincinnati General's ICU. Maya lay behind glass doors, tubes snaking from her arm, her leg wrapped in gauze that couldn't hide the blood seeping through. Her cheerleader skirt, now cut away, sat folded in a plastic bag, a relic of a life interrupted. James stood in the hallway, exactly 4 feet from the door, his boots aligned with the tile's edge, as if crossing that line would break something sacred. Nurses passed, their eyes darting to him, then away. He was a ghost in a gray jacket, unmovable, his silence louder than the monitor's steady beep. 5 years ago, James had buried his past with Renee's ashes. She'd been his anchor, a community organizer who saw hope where he saw threats. When cancer took her, she'd made him swear to give Maya a life free of shadows. He'd tried, coaching her cheer team, sitting through parent-teacher conferences, learning to braid her hair. But the skills that kept him alive in Fallujah, scanning for exits, reading intent in a glance, never left. Now, as Maya fought for breath, those skills hummed beneath his skin, a current he couldn't shut off. Officer Daniel Hayes paced the precinct break room, his coffee cold, his hands shaking. He'd fired the shot, seen the girl fall, seen the blood. It was a mistake, he told himself, a phone, not a gun, a reflex born of training. But the man's face, James's face, haunted him. No scream, no threat, just eyes that weighed him like a ledger. Hayes had a rap sheet of his own, write-ups for excessive force, complaints buried by union lawyers. He'd joined the force to prove he was tougher than the father who'd called him weak, but every badge felt like a lie he couldn't outrun. Officer Michael Reed sat at his desk, staring at a photo of his own daughter, Nia, who was Maya's age. He'd become a cop to change the system, to be the shield his younger self needed when he was profiled at 16, cuffed for walking home too late. But yesterday, he'd frozen, watching Hayes draw, watching Maya fall. He hadn't stopped it, hadn't spoken. His silence was a betrayal, not just of Maya, but of Nia, of himself. He wanted to confess, to call his wife and spill it all, but fear of losing his pension, his stability, kept his mouth shut. James hadn't moved in 6 hours. A nurse, a former army medic named Tom, recognized the posture, not grief, but control. He'd seen it in Ramadi, men who held chaos at bay with nothing but presence. "He's not a threat," Tom whispered to the charge nurse. "He's the reason threats don't get close." The hospital staff didn't call security, but they watched, unsure if James was a protector or a storm waiting to break. In a quiet moment, James reached into his pocket, pulling out a small silver pin, a falcon diving through flames, his old Delta Force call sign. He'd worn it through missions that left no trace, operations that ended with cities silent and enemies gone. He knelt, placing the pin on the floor by the ICU window, a marker for Maya to see when she woke. It wasn't a gift, it was a promise. He stood, his eyes never leaving her still form, and the nurses felt the air shift, as if the room itself knew something was coming. The precinct server room hummed with the weight of secrets, its air cool and heavy with the scent of overheating circuits. By midnight, the Cincinnati police database had crashed twice, spitting out "access denied" errors when anyone tried to pull James Carter's file. His name, his face, his past, nothing existed. Not in the DMV, not in federal records, not even in the shadow systems the feds didn't admit to having. A tech, sweating under fluorescent lights, muttered, "It's like he's a ghost." His supervisor, a woman who'd seen too many cover-ups, didn't respond. She just dialed a number that wasn't in her contacts, her hand steady but her pulse racing. James had always known this day might come. In Afghanistan, he'd led a unit that didn't exist, Ghost Team, they called it, though no one dared say it aloud. They'd dismantled rogue cells, neutralized threats, and vanished before the sun rose. But a mission in 2010 went wrong, civilians died, a school reduced to rubble. James carried the guilt like a second skin, a locket with Renee's photo his only anchor. His team made a pact that night: if the system ever turned on one of them, they'd answer as one. Now, with Maya bleeding in a hospital bed, that pact was waking up. Somewhere in Nevada, a man named Eli sharpened a knife in his garage, the grindstone's rhythm matching his pulse. He'd been James's sniper, a father who'd lost his son to a drunk driver years ago, his grief forged into loyalty. His phone buzzed, a single pulse, a red-level signal. He didn't check it. He unwrapped a map, its edges worn, marked with a falcon sigil. In Maine, a fisherman named Sam felt the same signal through a flickering solar panel. He'd been James's demolitions expert, haunted by the faces of those he couldn't save. He pulled a scope from a crate, his hands steady despite the years. In Colorado, a runner named Marcus, James's recon specialist, found a dog tag fragment in his mailbox, half a letter, R. He packed a duffel, his cabin's silence louder than any order. In Texas, a builder named Javier paused mid-hammer, a shortwave radio spitting out 6 digits and a word: reversal. He'd been James's medic, carrying a photo of Maya's 5th birthday, a promise to protect her. Back in Cincinnati, Officer Hayes found his service weapon lighter than it should be. He pulled it from his holster in the precinct parking lot, heart pounding. The barrel was sealed, the serial number scratched out. A metal tag sat on his dashboard, etched with 2 words, for Maya. He didn't sleep that night, his mind replaying the shot, the blood, James's eyes. Reed, meanwhile, sat in his car outside his daughter's school, watching her laugh with friends. He wanted to confess, to tell the world he'd failed Maya, but the weight of his badge, his family, his fear, kept him silent. James stood outside the ICU, his presence a quiet storm. He didn't need to act yet, his silence was enough. The hospital's cameras blinked off for 3 seconds, just long enough to miss him slipping a note into Maya's room: "I'm here. Always." The nurses didn't see him move, but they felt the air change, like a tide turning before a wave. The city of Cincinnati woke to a hashtag #MayaLives. It started with a grainy video, uploaded anonymously to X at 3 a.m., showing Maya's collapse, the phone skittering across the pavement, James kneeling beside her. No edits, no filters, just raw truth. Lila Brooks, a 30-year-old activist with scars from her own run-in with police at 16, shared it first. She'd been organizing for years, her voice sharp from speaking truths no one wanted to hear. The video hit her like a punch. She saw herself in Maya, saw her own fear in that pink cheerleader skirt. By noon, the hashtag was trending, murals of Maya's face appearing on over-the-Rhine walls, her smile painted over cracked brick. Lila stood at a community vigil, her phone live-streaming to thousands. "This isn't just about Maya," she said, her voice steady but burning. "It's about every kid who's been a target, every parent who's had to kneel in blood." The crowd roared, signs reading "Justice for Maya" and "Silence is Violence" waving under streetlights. Lila's past, surviving a baton to the ribs at a protest, fueled her fire. She wasn't just fighting for Maya, she was fighting for the girl she'd been. At the precinct, Officer Hayes felt the walls closing in. His phone buzzed with notifications, ex-posts tagging him, calling him out. A glass at a bar he frequented had a triangle etched into it, split by 2 lines, the words for Maya scratched beneath. He laughed it off to his partner, but his hands shook. He'd grown up in a house where his father's belt was the only law, and he'd joined the force to escape that weakness. Now, he felt it creeping back, his badge no shield against the shadow hunting him. Officer Reed sat in a church pew, his wife's hand on his. He hadn't told her about the shooting, about his silence. He'd wanted to be a cop who made a difference. inspired by his own teenage humiliation at the hands of police. But now, his inaction was a wound that wouldn't close. He stared at the altar, praying for courage, but all he felt was shame. James stood outside the hospital, the falcon pin back in his pocket. He'd activated the signal 2 days ago, and his team was moving: Eli in Nevada, Sam in Maine, Marcus in Colorado, Javier in Texas. They didn't need orders, they knew the pact. In 2010, a mission had gone wrong, civilian blood on their hands. James had pulled them through, taken the blame, and they'd sworn to protect his family if the system ever turned. Now, they were converging, not for vengeance but for truth. Judge Sarah Thompson, 50, sat in her chambers, her brother's wrongful arrest 30 years ago still a scar on her heart. She'd climbed the bench to fight for justice, and now she saw her chance. She issued an order: every buried police misconduct case from the last 5 years, unredacted, on her desk by week's end. The precinct scrambled, their systems groaning under the weight of secrets. James's silence had cracked something open, and Sarah was ready to let the light in. The precinct's digital archive was a fortress of forgotten sins, but someone had slipped inside. At 3:47 a.m., a man in a maintenance uniform, nobody asked for his ID, moved through Cincinnati PD's basement corridors. The cameras blinked off for 11 seconds, a loop so clean it was invisible. He reached the server room, entered an obsolete code, and the lock clicked open. No alarms. He plugged in a device no bigger than a lighter, its commands written in a language no tech would recognize. Within minutes, 15 cases, tagged excessive force, minor, racial identifier, were copied, reconstructed, and sent to 5 inboxes: 2 civil rights groups, a prosecutor, a public defender, and a retired IA agent. A note attached read, "These were never yours to hide." James hadn't moved from the hospital hallway, but his reach was everywhere. His team had acted without words: Eli's map, Sam's scope, Marcus's duffel, Javier's watch. They were fathers too, each carrying a loss that bound them to James. Eli's son, gone in a crash. Sam's sister, lost to a war he couldn't stop. Marcus's mother, killed in a robbery he couldn't prevent. Javier's daughter, Maya's age when he last saw her, before her mother took her away. Their pact wasn't just loyalty, it was penance. Lila Brooks watched the files spread online, each one a wound reopened. Footage of a black teen tackled for looking suspicious, audio of officers laughing over a broken arm, emails joking about problem kids. She posted them to X, her captions sharp: "This is your police. This is your city." The hashtag Silent Justice joined hashtag #MyLives, the city's anger boiling into protests outside City Hall. Lila's own scars ached, she'd been that teen, beaten for being in the wrong place. Now, she was Maya's voice, her mother's echo. Officer Hayes sat in his apartment, blinds drawn, his gun on the table, not his real one, still replaced with a dummy. He'd tried to call his union rep, but the line went dead. A message appeared on his phone: "No sender, you fired the shot. You lit the match." He wanted to run, to disappear, but every exit felt like a trap. His father's voice echoed in his head: "Toughen up, Danny." But toughness couldn't save him now. Officer Reed met with Judge Thompson in secret, his badge heavy in his pocket. "I didn't stop it," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I saw her fall, and I froze." Sarah listened, her eyes hard but not cruel. She'd lost her brother to a system that didn't care, and she saw his pain in Reed's face. "You can't undo it," she said. "But you can speak." Reed nodded, knowing his career was over, but Nia's face, his daughter's, gave him the strength to try. James stood by the ICU window, watching Maya's chest rise and fall. He didn't enter, not yet. He'd promised Renee he'd keep her safe, not just from bullets but from the man he'd been. His silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy, a way to let the system choke on its own lies while he protected what mattered most. The Cincinnati City Hall hearing was meant to be routine, a box-checking exercise in community engagement. The room smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, filled with suits and carefully vetted locals. Lila Brooks sat in the back, her phone recording, her eyes sharp. Judge Sarah Thompson was there, her presence a quiet demand for truth. The agenda promised discussions on officer training and urban safety, but no one mentioned Maya Carter. Not until James walked in. He moved down the aisle, his gray jacket blending into the crowd, but his presence cut through the room like a blade. No escort, no announcement, just a man who seemed to pull gravity with him. The moderator, a city councilor with a practiced smile, faltered mid-sentence. James reached the microphone, his hands steady, his eyes scanning the room, not for threats, but for accountability. The air stilled, the crowd's murmurs fading into a hush. Daniel Hayes. Michael Reed, James said, his voice low, deliberate, each name landing like a stone in still water. You have 24 hours to surrender. Not to me. To the truth. The room didn't erupt, it froze. Hayes, watching from a live feed in his apartment, dropped his phone, the screen cracking. Reed, in the audience, felt his heart seize, his daughter's face flashing in his mind. Lila's stream spiked, thousands watching in real time, the hashtag silent justice trending again. James didn't elaborate, didn't accuse. He turned and walked out, the cameras scrambling but catching only his back, a shadow moving through light. James's past had taught him this, words were weapons, but silence was a strategy. In Iraq, he'd coordinated strikes with a glance, saved lives with a nod. Now, he used that same precision to unravel a system that had betrayed his daughter. His team was in place, Eli in a motel nearby, Sam watching from a rooftop, Marcus tailing a precinct van, Javier rerouting camera feeds. They didn't need to speak, their pact was their language. Hayes drove to a bar, his hands shaking, ordering a whiskey he didn't drink. A coaster slid under his glass, a triangle etched into it, split by two lines. He stood, heart pounding, and checked his gun again, still a fake. He wanted to fight, to scream, but every move felt like stepping into a trap. His father's voice mocked him, weak, Danny, always weak. He left the bar, the night too quiet, the streets too empty. Reed sat in his car, writing a confession on his phone. I failed Maya Carter, he typed. I failed my daughter. He thought of Nia, of the promise he'd made to be better than the cops who'd cuffed him at 16. He sent the note to Judge Thompson, his hands trembling, knowing it was the first step toward redemption, or ruin. Maya stirred in her ICU bed, her eyes fluttering open for the first time in days. Dad, she whispered, her voice dry but clear. A nurse rushed in, heart racing, and saw the falcon pin by the window, glinting in the moonlight. She didn't touch it, didn't speak. She just knew James had been there, his silence louder than any vow. The city felt the shift before it saw it. By morning, #Silent Justice was more than a hashtag, it was a movement. Murals of Maya's face spread across Cincinnati, her cheerleader smile painted on bus stops, her name scrawled in chalk on sidewalks. Lila Brooks stood at a rally in Washington Park, her voice hoarse from hours of speaking. We're not just fighting for Maya, she told the crowd, her phone live streaming to millions. We're fighting for every kid who's been erased, every parent who's had to beg for justice. Her own past, beaten at a protest, left with a fractured rib and a fire that never died, gave her words weight. The crowd chanted, Maya lives, their voices a chorus against silence. Judge Sarah Thompson sat in her chambers, stacks of unredacted files on her desk. Each one was a story of abuse, teens cuffed for nothing, families ignored, officers laughing in group chats. Her brother's face, arrested for looking wrong, at 19, stared back from every page. She'd fought her way to the bench to fix this, and now she had her chance. She drafted an order for a public hearing, demanding full transparency. The precinct pushed back, claiming data errors, but Sarah's voice was steel. Fix your errors, or I'll fix your system. Officer Hayes was unraveling. He'd found a note in his locker, no sender, just a triangle and the words "you can't outrun truth." He'd tried to delete body cam footage from the shooting, but the files were already gone, mirrored to servers he couldn't touch. His father's voice echoed, "Prove you're not weak." But Hayes felt it now, weakness, not in his body, but in his soul. He drove to a precinct safe house, hoping to hide, but the door was unlocked, a single photo on the table, Maya, bleeding, his own face in the background, smirking. He didn't sleep. Officer Reed met his daughter, Nia, at a diner, her eyes searching his. "Why didn't you stop it, Dad?" she asked, her voice soft but cutting. Reed's confession to Judge Thompson had leaked, and Nia had seen it online. He wanted to explain, his fear, his bills, his dream of reforming the system, but the words choked him. "I'm trying to make it right," he said, his hands shaking. Nia nodded, not forgiving, but listening. Reed knew he'd lost her trust, but he'd fight to earn it back. James stood in an abandoned warehouse on Cincinnati's west side, the air thick with dust and memory. His team was there, Eli with his knife, Sam with his scope, Marcus with his duffel, Javier with his watch. They didn't speak of the mission, they spoke of their losses. Eli's son, Sam's sister, Marcus's mother, Javier's daughter. "We're not here for blood," James said, his voice low. "We're here for her voice." He handed each a map, marked with the Falcon sigil, detailing pressure points, courts, media, precincts. They nodded, their silence a vow. Maya, still in the ICU, clutched the Falcon pin, her fingers tracing its wings. She didn't know her father's full past, but she felt it in his absence, in the way the nurses whispered about the man who never left. She wanted to write, to tell her story, to be her mother's daughter. Her fear was fading, replaced by a spark, Renee's spark, the one that lit up rooms and fought for truth. Officer Daniel Hayes stood in a motel parking lot on the edge of Cincinnati, the neon sign flickering above him. His hands shook as he checked his car's undercarriage, finding a tiny camera lens wired into the chassis. He hadn't put it there. His mind raced back to the shot he'd fired, Maya's blood, James's eyes. He'd grown up fighting to be seen as strong, but now he felt hunted, exposed. He drove to a precinct ally, a retired captain named Gorman, who'd once covered his mistakes. "I need to disappear," Hayes pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. Gorman leaned back, his face hard. "You didn't just shoot a kid, Danny. You shot his kid. You don't vanish from that." Hayes's stomach dropped. Gorman had been his shield, a man who'd buried complaints to protect good cops. But now, even he looked scared. "You stood there, smirking," Gorman said. "You woke something bigger than you." Hayes left, the words for Maya burning in his mind, etched into every shadow. Officer Michael Reed sat in Judge Thompson's chambers, his resignation letter in hand. "I'm done," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "I failed Maya, and I failed my daughter." Sarah nodded, her eyes soft but unyielding. She'd seen too many black men like her brother broken by the system, and she saw Reed's pain. "You're not done," she said. "You're starting. Go tell your truth." Reed left, his badge lighter, his heart heavier. He'd mentor kids like Nia, teach them they didn't need to fear the badge, or wear it, to matter. Lila Brooks stood on a makeshift stage in a Cincinnati church, her phone live streaming to a growing audience. "They want us to forget Maya," she said, her voice raw. "But we won't. We'll keep her name alive until the system answers." The crowd cheered, holding signs with Maya's face, her cheerleader smile a beacon. Lila's own scars, physical and emotional, pushed her forward. She'd survived to fight, and now she fought for Maya, for Renee, for every kid the system tried to erase. James moved through the city's shadows, his team tightening the net. Eli rerouted precinct cameras, exposing badge numbers. Sam leaked emails to Lila, showing officers joking about problem kids. Marcus tailed Hayes, leaving a single note on his windshield, truth or consequence. Javier hacked a radio broadcast, playing James's voice, if I fall, don't forgive. If I stand, they pay. The city felt it, a storm building, not in violence, but in exposure. Maya sat up in her bed, a notebook in her lap, the falcon pin on her nightstand. She wrote, her words shaky but clear, I'm not my father's shadow. I'm my mother's light. She remembered Renee's stories, her fight for justice, her belief that words could change the world. Maya's leg ached, but her heart burned. She'd tell her story, not as a victim, but as a voice. James stood outside her room, unseen, his hand brushing the locket with Renee's photo. He didn't enter. His silence was his shield, keeping Maya safe from the man he'd been. But he felt her strength, her mother's strength, and knew she'd carry the fight he'd started. The Cincinnati skyline glowed under a gray dawn, but the city was anything but quiet. Protests swelled outside City Hall, chants of Maya lives echoing through the streets. Lila Brooks stood at the forefront, her phone a weapon, streaming every moment. A new leak had dropped, body cam footage of Officer Hayes laughing after cuffing a black teen last year, his voice cruel, should have stayed home, kid. The video spread like wildfire, #SilentJustice trending alongside #MyLives. Lila's hands shook as she posted, her own memories of police violence burning in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for Maya, she was fighting for the girl she'd been, the one who'd believed justice was possible. Judge Sarah Thompson sat in a courtroom, her gavel heavy. The unredacted files, 15 cases of buried misconduct, lay before her, each one a testament to a system that protected its own. She thought of her brother, cuffed for nothing, his dreams crushed. She issued a ruling, every officer named in the files would face a public inquiry, no exceptions. The precinct's union roared, but Sarah's voice was louder, the truth doesn't negotiate. Her ruling cracked the system open, exposing its rot to the world. Officer Hayes sat in a stolen car, his badge discarded, his gun still a fake. He'd tried to erase the footage, to run, but every move felt like a trap. A photo appeared on his dashboard, him, mid-laugh, the teen's fear in the background. He drove to the hospital, desperate to end it, to silence Maya before she could speak. He slipped past a tired nurse, the ICU dark and quiet. But as he reached her door, James was there, a shadow in gray, his eyes calm but unyielding. Out, James said, his voice low, final. Or lie beside her. Hayes froze, then fled, his cowardice louder than his gun had been. Officer Reed stood at a press conference, his resignation public, his voice breaking. I stood by while Maya Carter bled, he said, tears falling. I failed her, my daughter, myself. The crowd was silent, not with judgment, but with respect. Reed thought of Nia, of the cop he'd wanted to be. He'd mentor kids now, teach them to fight with truth, not fists. His confession was a step, not an end. Maya wrote in her notebook, her words sharper now, they shot me, but they didn't silence me. I'm my mother's daughter, and I'll tell the world. She clutched the falcon pin, feeling her father's presence, his silence a shield around her heart. She didn't know his full past, but she knew his love, and that was enough. James stood in an alley, his team around him. Eli, Sam, Marcus, Javier, each carried a memento of loss, a reason to fight. They'd expose the truth, not with bullets, but with precision, letting the system choke on its lies. James nodded, the falcon sigil on his map glowing in the dim light. She's awake, he said. Now we wait. Maya Carter sat in a wheelchair by her hospital window, the Cincinnati skyline stretching before her. Her leg was scarred, her cheerleader days over, but her notebook was full, pages of words, her mother's fire reborn. A viral video had captured her waking, her whispered "Dad" echoing across X with hashtag "She asked for him." The city saw her not as a victim, but as a voice, her smile a beacon against the gray. She wrote, "I'm not here to carry my father's silence. I'm here to speak my mother's truth." The falcon pin sat on her table, a reminder of James's love, his promise. Officer Daniel Hayes stood in a courtroom, his confession raw, unscripted. "I shot Maya Carter," he said, his voice hollow. "I saw a phone, but I fired anyway. I was scared, angry, wrong." The room was silent, the weight of his words heavier than any sentence. His father's voice was gone now, replaced by Maya's face, her blood on the pavement. He'd faced charges, but the real punishment was living with the truth. He'd tried to run, but James's shadow had caught him, not with violence, but with exposure. Officer Michael Reed mentored kids in a community center, his badge gone but his purpose clear. He told them about Maya, about his failure, about the cop he'd wanted to be. Nia watched from the back, her eyes soft with pride, not forgiveness. Reed's redemption wasn't complete, but it was honest, a step toward the man he'd promised his daughter he'd be. Lila Brooks stood on a street corner, a mural of Maya behind her, painted by kids who'd never met her. Hashtag Silent Justice had become a movement, not for vengeance, but for truth. Lila's scars ached, but her voice was steady. She posted, "Maya lives. So does her fight." Her past had taught her to survive, now, she taught others to speak. Judge Sarah Thompson oversaw the public inquiry, the 15 cases now headlines. Officers resigned, policies changed, the system bending under the weight of its own secrets. Sarah thought of her brother, of Maya, and knew this was just the start. She'd keep pushing, her gavel a tool for justice, not silence. James visited Maya one last time, slipping into her room at dawn. She was awake, her eyes meeting his, no words needed. He placed Renee's locket beside the falcon pin, a piece of her mother to carry forward. "You're her light," he said, his voice soft, final. He touched her hand, then left, his steps silent, his shadow gone before the sun rose. Cincinnati changed. Murals of Maya stayed, her smile a reminder. A plaque appeared in Washington Park. He didn't want justice. He wanted silence to be heard. No one claimed it, but no one removed it. James's team, Eli, Sam, Marcus, Javier, faded back to their lives, their pact fulfilled. The city didn't speak his name, but it felt his weight, his silence a legacy louder than any shout. To everyone who walked this journey, thank you. You've stood with Maya through her pain, with James through his silence, with a city finding its voice. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it, let it reach someone who needs to know that truth can outlast lies. Subscribe to Revenge Ties, where every story is a fight for heart, hope, and a new beginning. Keep speaking your truth, and I'll meet you at the next story.